There was once a great Athenian philosopher named Socrates, and a biography of his life describes the mission, the purpose, the extent of his inquiry. The objective to be discovered by the philosopher is this: whatsoever is good or evil in a house. And this line, whatsoever is good or evil in a house, is an adaptation of a line from Book 4 of Homer's Odyssey, and Socrates correctly understood the themes of Homer. He deals with the mutual intercourse of men. To this end, Homer explores the relationship between leader and subject, the proper use of authority, and the importance of obedience. Disobedience is an evil within a state. Consider these words at line 7 of the Fagles translation, referring to the fate of Odysseus' crew. He could not save them from disaster, hard as he strove. The recklessness of their own ways destroyed them all. The blind fools, they devoured the cattle of the sun. This message will be all the more clear once this saga plays out in Book 12, that a good leader must be followed. His best efforts may yet be in vain if his counsel is not heard. In addition to this concept, Homer will explore the ways of government in various lands. Many cities of men he saw and learned their minds. Now the word for mind in the Greek is nous. The mind is crucial for good leadership in Homer's world, as we can see in the good city, in Phaeacia, and the ruined city, Ithaca without Odysseus. Now in the halls of Phaeacia, which we will see in Book 7, we meet the king Alcinous. Alci meaning strong, nous meaning mind. He has a strong mind. His wife, Arete, is virtue. In Book 7, we will learn that in the well-governed land of Phaeacia, they, as in the Phaeacians, obeyed him like a god. But in Ithaca, in Book 1, we meet Antinous, the most arrogant of the suitors to Penelope, opposing or opposite, anti-mind. Of all the suitors, Antinous is the most oppositional against good counsel, as we will see. Now, when Athena arrives at the palace of Odysseus, we see it as a disorganized refuge for idlers at line 124. She found the swaggering suitors just then amusing themselves with rolling dice before the doors, lounging on hides of oxen they had killed themselves. So they've helped themselves to someone else's property. It's an invasion, really. Into what greater desuetude could a state fall than when possessions are so exposed to plunder? And these things are further elaborated on when Athena speaks with Telemachus, Odysseus' young son. At line 263, the problems of the house are discussed. Athena says of the suitors, "How obscenely they lounge and swagger here. Look, gorging your house. Why, any man of sense who chanced among them would be outraged, seeing such behavior." Telemachus acknowledges, "Once this house was rich, no doubt, beyond reproach, when the man you mentioned still lived here, at home. Now the gods have reversed our fortunes with a vengeance, wiped that man from the earth like no one else before." And in these lines we see the decline of the state with no strong leader. We see that parasitic behavior thrives and wealth is depleted. So after we see the suitors feasting on someone else's goods, Athena advises Telemachus to call an assembly of all the dignitaries of Ithaca, that he might urge the suitors to leave in front of the other inhabitants of the island, and following that, to fit out a ship for himself, to go off and gather news about his father. And it is in Book 2 that the prince addresses the Ithacan assembly, and in this speech Telemachus continues with the themes we've been discussing. They infest our palace day and night. They butcher our cattle, our sheep, our fat goats, feasting themselves sick, swilling our glowing wine as if there's no tomorrow, all of it squandered. Now we have no man like Odysseus in command to drive this curse from the house. We ourselves? We're hardly the ones to fight them off. All we do is parade our wretched weakness. Telemachus has addressed those lines we just read to the people of Ithaca, not the suitors. These people do not live in his palace, but they have their own homes and farms on the island. But there is a break in the speech, and Telemachus addresses the suitors directly. He says at line 69, "You should be ashamed yourselves. Now, I'm going to rely on the truth of the Robert Fagel's translation and assume that Homer purposefully did not say, you should be ashamed of yourselves. To say you should be ashamed yourselves implies that Telemachus is also ashamed. To make this speech to everyone, it's embarrassing to confess this weakness when you are the prince, the heir to the throne, pleading with the Ithacan subjects to disinfect your own house, too weak to protect it yourself. When Telemachus has finished speaking, these are the lines. Filled with anger, down on the ground he dashed the speaker's scepter, bursting into tears. Pity seized the assembly. All just sat there silent. Only Antinous, who found it in himself to say, so high and mighty Telemachus. And then he continues with his speech. So it is our anti-mind, who can see the prince humble himself before the people and yet find it in himself to call the young boy high and mighty. This Antinous is our opposer of justice, revealing himself. In the great work by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, in Faust, there is a moment when the devil, or Mephistopheles, defines himself. Faust says to the devil, the essence of the like of you is usually inherent in the name. It appears in all too great transparency. And Mephistopheles has a little outburst and says, Ich bin der Geist, der stets verneint. I am the spirit that denies forever. So when Goethe uses the word verneinen, or to deny, like Homer naming his antagonist anti-mind, Antinous, these writers search for a phrase to communicate a polluting sort of person that brings a negative charge to the mutual intercourse of men, elements that seek to expose, accuse, deny, and dwell always upon human weakness. Here, Antinous goes into a tirade against Penelope between lines 95 and 140, accusing her of egging them on, and the speech seems like a normal enough rant if you think about it. And yet nowhere in the Odyssey does Odysseus spend so many words on another person's imperfections. And we notice when we read the Odyssey that almost every time we encounter the suitors, they're always speaking ill about someone, always insulting. Anyone can fixate on human weakness and find the worst things about people. That is what it means to be an Antinous, a denier, an accuser, a harsh element in society. Now, Mentor is present at this assembly, and he says to those present at line 263, I don't grudge these arrogant suitors for a moment, weaving their violent work with all their wicked hearts. Now, these lines go to what we were just saying. Mentor's reaction is, I'm not going to waste my time bemoaning the fact that men like this exist in the world. That's a waste of time. And when he calls that work violent, Homer may have agreed with Dante, who writes in Canto 11 of his Inferno, violence can aim at the person or the possessions. So impoverishing a home is an act of violence. Mentor continues to chide the Ithacan people, but all the rest of you, how you rouse my fury, sitting here in silence, never a word put forth to curb these suitors, paltry few as they are, and you so many. But one of the suitors scoffs at this. It's uphill work, I warn you, says this suitor, fighting a force like ours, for just a meal. Now, these suitors are feasting off the labor of Ithacan farmers on Odysseus' estate and are acting like parasites in another man's house, and yet because they pose no threat to life and limb, they do not rouse a resistance. As the suitor says, it's just a meal. But when Mentor emphasizes that the rest of the Ithacans greatly outnumber the suitors, but for fear of uphill work do not come to the call of Telemachus, is yet another demonstration from Homer that the absence of a good leader allows toxic elements to thrive, without that leader to rally the good elements against them. This is why Homer begins the poem in Ithaca and waits until Book 5 to introduce Odysseus himself. He wants to show us his greatness through the greatness of the vacancy he has left in his homeland.